Tensions in France are escalating to a very serious degree, notably over Islam and the belief among many people in France that they cannot live side by side with those who practice this religion. A letter was written to the president by around 20 former soldiers, many retired generals, saying that civil war was coming. Because many of these people have created, many of those who practice Islam who've come to the country have created no-go areas or segregated areas, and eventually it's going to boil over. For this, they're facing some kind of court-martial, and there's a lot of outrage. But the first thing we actually heard was that many academics, many politicians in France were saying these left-wing ideas from the U.S. were infecting France and were going to destabilize the country. Of course, you've seen a lot of the sentiment in the United States supportive of this conservative religion, Islam. It's extremely conservative religion. The far left have supported this, and it's reached very strange circumstances, notably in the UK, where schools were teaching an LGBTQ curriculum, and it was actually Muslims who showed up to protest it, and it was LGBTQ activists facing off with Muslims, and it was just a very strange circumstance, I suppose. The left supporting an ideology that doesn't support them back. Well, in France, we're now hearing another letter has been written, this time by soldiers. And again, the sentiment is clear. I know that things are pretty bad in the US, but what we're seeing with France is, it reflects a lot of what we are seeing. Not the whole religion thing, that's particularly different, but certainly the leftist thing and the just general instability. I think if this escalates in France, we can see similar things happening across Europe, because certainly it's not only France that has been dealing with a lot of these issues. We can see the media in the US continue to push outright lies and creepy conspiracies and just downright weird explanations to defend their political power and exploit those they think would support them. It's particularly fascinating how the left is very supportive of a conservative Abrahamic religion. By all means, I think everybody should be allowed to practice their religion. I got no issue with anybody who practices, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. I'm simply pointing out that typically religious conservatives don't mesh well with social justice activists on the left. But for some reason, Islam is under their protection. They fight for it. Christianity isn't. And one is particularly more conservative, to say the least. I'll put it that way. Maybe conservative isn't the right word. Maybe traditionalist and authoritarian is a better way to explain it. But I think France is in for some tough times, and I think we're seeing something interesting. There was a conspiracy theory. Well, I don't know if you can call it that. A bunch of churches were being burned across Europe, and the media keeps saying that it's all coincidence. It's just to ignore it. And a lot of people are saying no. And now with these letters coming out, there's a very real concern that Europe is on the brink. Well, let me read for you this story from Voice of America. Now, keep in mind, Voice of America is like American propaganda. But it's interesting nonetheless. They say, second open letter by French soldiers warns of civil insurrection. They say disquiet is growing within France's military ranks, with the publication of a second open letter, this time by serving soldiers, warning growing Islamism, delinquency, and violence threaten the country's very survival. This latest open letter by members of France's armed forces is making headlines and stirring debate. Like one last month signed by some 20 retired generals, it too warns of civilian insurrection fueled by President Emmanuel Macron's alleged concessions to fundamentalist Islam. But this newest missive, published late Sunday night by right-wing magazine Velour Actuel, I can't pronounce it, is from an anonymous group of soldiers currently serving the army. They describe serving in countries like Afghanistan and Central African Republic and losing friends in the fight against fundamentalist Islam, which they claim Macron is caving into at home. The group endorses the earlier letter by the generals and criticizes the president for allegedly disrespecting those officers. But it says the military will maintain order in France should civil war break out. Macron's government blasted the general's letter as defying Republican principles and the army's duty. It says its signatories will be punished. Critics also include far-left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon. In remarks to French media, he called for an investigation, claiming the general's letter amounted to a call for a coup. This is so weird. Why is the left supporting a traditionalist Abrahamic religion? It's happening in Europe. It's happening here. It's happening in the UK and France. I just find it strange. By all means, you're allowed to do it. I'm not saying, don't support. It seems rather contradictory. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They say, A recent poll suggests the majority of French support the letter. An online petition backing the latest letter by serving officers quickly got nearly 1,000 signatories within hours. News reports suggest up to 2,000 French soldiers also back the general's call. So does the main opposition far-right National Rally Party. Leading National Rally politician Thierry Mariani told French radio Monday the military are loyal to the country. The letter's authors, he said, were simply voicing today's reality. The letter comes amid heightened concern about radical Islam here. Following a spate of terror attacks, government legislation aimed to boost the anti-terror response and crackdown on extremist groups has drawn criticism from the left for going too far and the right for not going far enough. Well, in this story from just over a week ago from The Guardian, French soldiers to face military court over letter warning of civil war. Letter signed by at least 18 soldiers, as well as a number of retired military figures, calls for protection of civilizational values. I want to read you this, but let's just talk about the greater ramification here. It doesn't matter whose side you're on, in my opinion. It matters that hyperpolarization isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. And it may be that whatever this psychosis is that's emerging in the U.S. and in many other countries, maybe it's coming from the U.S., is ripping apart more than one country. The rise of the far left, they have no rules. They're a chaotic, destructive force. They are rotting the core of the United States. And it's like fire. It's like our foundation has caught fire and the fire is spreading and we don't know how to put it out. One of the problems is that when you look to France, for instance, you see these politicians who are weak and feckless. We like that word, don't we? They are unable to lead, to make hard decisions and recognize the world is not candy canes and rainbows. We all aren't going to hold hands under the sun, singing songs with the rainbow overhead after the storm. Things are going to get bad. Things are potentially going to get bad. And many of these people are warning about it. But in the United States, we have many politicians who just want to placate the mob. Now, we saw the opposite of that in Plano, Texas. I did a story on this yesterday, talking about the police actually protecting the far left. And Ken Paxton of Texas, he was rather upset, saying that we cannot become a lawless state. There are some states that seem to be standing up and saying there's a reason for a rule of law. I've seen some interesting posts referencing the culture war, potential civil unrest, things like this. And they say you just need to understand that change happens. You need to accept change. And one of the stories I often tell is how I grew up skateboarding. And when I started skating, people who were like the good skaters wore big baggy jeans. And the younger skaters started wearing super tight jeans. And the big baggy pants guys were like, you kids are losers wearing dumb looking pants. And that was just a trend change, right? So then when I got older and my generation was now wearing these tight pants, the younger kids started wearing short ankle pants, like flooded pants, where like they don't go all the way down to your shoes. And they got made fun of. My response was, dude, times change. Don't you remember when they made fun of us? Now you're going to make fun of them? That's stupid. Let people do their thing. However, I bring that up because it's a reference to fashion, which we don't care all that much about. There's a reason why we don't just say, times change, accept it. And there's a reason why conservatives say things should not change in these ways. Conservatives, what do they conserve? Order. That's kind of the point. Not always, not perfectly. The idea of a conservative is that they're saying, this is what works. We survive. Let's keep doing these things. Let's not do that thing. Now you have progressives, many who want progress for the sake of progress. And I do air quotes for progress because they're basically saying, change things. We don't care how or why or what it results in. So the ultimate issue is, you see what happens in countries like France when you bring in cultures that don't work well together. So let me put it this way. I believe people should be able to practice whatever religion they want. However, the Constitution of the United States supersedes the fundamentalism of your religion. So by all means, you can come here and practice your religion, but you can't force me to do things. You can't make me adhere to your religious ways. There have been problems of ideology in government. This country has been Christian, the United States, for its foundation was Christian, and it's slowly eroding away. So these Christian moral frameworks were a part of our government, which means we were very tolerant of people who practiced other religions. However, in the United States, multiculturalism works in the sense that there is one big American umbrella, the rules by which we live by, the culture by which we abide by. And underneath that, there are many other cultures. There are cultures and then there are subcultures. The problem is the left seems to believe in this idea of multiculturalism without a parent culture. Look what's happening in France. When you bring in staunch fundamentalist Islamists, these are people who don't care for your rules and don't want to live by them and don't consider them to be a part of their way of life, then you're going to get conflict. In the United States, when you look to, say, Chinatown, these are people who want the overarching protections of American culture, capitalism, and the Constitution. And then they have their, different cuisines and they have different traditions. They take care of their family in different ways. That's fantastic. What's happening in France? Not so much so, and the left blindly defends it. Now, these generals are facing military court. The Guardian reports at least 18 soldiers who signed an open letter warning of the risk of civil war in France and the need to fight the perils of Islamism and anti-racism are to face military sanctions amid a bitter row between the government and the far right. It's not just about Islam. This letter was warning about anti-racism, which it's the most psychotic thing I've ever heard. Anti-racism. We should call it what it is. We got to call it something. Identitarianism. These people use these words to trick stupid people who don't pay attention. And I'm sorry, but when these stupid people come out believing the lies, they contribute to the downfall. And it's very, very nightmarish. But anti-racism is not opposed to racism. It actually fully embraces it and wants more of it. They say the letter, signed by at least 18 soldiers, including 4 officers and a number of retired military figures, said lax government policies would result in chaos, requiring the intervention of our comrades on active duty in a perilous mission of protection of our civilizational values. The Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Francois Lecointre, said each soldier would go before a senior military council and could be delisted or put into immediate retirement. Hervé Grandjean, the defense ministry spokesman, said on Thursday that by openly criticizing the government or appealing to comrades to take up arms on national territory, the signatories had clearly broken military rules. The letter sparked fury from the French government as the far-right leader Marine Le Pen said she understood the sentiments and called on the signatories to support her politics and her bid for the French presidency in 2022. With the Harris Interactive poll on Thursday for LCI TV showing that 58% of French people agreed with the sentiments in the letter, the tone was set for an increasingly bitter political debate a year before the 2022 election. Marine Le Pen, many people liken her to like the female Trump in France. She might actually win because the government has failed to do what the people want it to do. You don't need a Donald Trump if the politicians are doing their job. But when they don't do it, you get a Trump. Le Pen has launched her presidential bid and extensive media campaign far ahead of candidates on the mainstream right or left who are yet to be decided. Polls currently show her making it to the final runoff against Emmanuel Macron, who beat her in 2017 on a centrist manifesto. The government used the row to attack Le Pen, who has spent a decade attempting to detoxify the image of the far-right party and significantly broaden its support base. The government said that by courting the signatories of the letter, Le Pen had revealed herself as a dangerous figure, unchanged from the party's jackbooted reputation under her father, the ex-paratrooper Jean-Marie Le Pen. You know what, man? We are being eroded from the inside out by this corruption. We are being, our foundations, our country, our moral foundations, other countries, France, our values are being destroyed, disintegrated, set ablaze. Because people just don't care. Right now in the United States, you probably heard, I covered it. There are gas shortages at many stations. There are gas lines emerging, people waiting in massive stretches of cars to get gasoline. And the New York Times publishes a story where they say there are no gas lines. No long lines. Not true. Everybody, go back to bed, America. Your government is in control, right? They had the nerve to actually tweet that out. Now, either they are very, very dumb people or it's propaganda, because there are dumb people in this country, in Britain, in Canada, in France, who will see whatever the media says and just go, must be true. And the rest of us suffer because of it. They lie and it must be true. So now the people of France, I don't know if Marine Le Pen is the right candidate, but I do know you're saying 58% support the sentiments of the letter, according to that poll, if you trust the poll. There are soldiers stepping up and saying something bad is happening. But the media just lies and dumb people just carry on. And that is the big challenge for any civilization, any, classically liberal society or one that purports to be. When stupid people negate your vote, calamity. They go on to say, the Interior Minister, Gerard Darmanin, said that Marine Le Pen had clearly kept her father's taste for the sound of marching boots. Le Pen first gave a written response to the signatories of the open letter saying, I invite you to join us in taking part in the coming battle, which is the Battle of France. This sparked criticism from both left and right and was described by the left-wing Daily Liberation as a call to sedition. Le Pen later told France Info Radio, while she shared the soldiers' diagnosis of a country afflicted by lawless areas, crime, self-hatred, and our leaders' rejection of patriotism, she agreed that these problems can only be solved by politics. Her niece, Marianne Maréchal, a popular young figure on the far right, on Thursday, said she did not think the open letter was a call to insurrection and added, I think that we need soldiers in the public debate. Government ministers said the signatories were an isolated and irrelevant minority in the military. The letter was published last week on the 60th anniversary of a failed coup d'etat by generals opposed to France granting independence to Algeria. Anger in France over civil war warning. What's happening here in the United States? The same warnings repeatedly going out. But we don't have the soldiers doing it. Maybe there should be. We had a bunch of soldiers, I guess, warn against Donald Trump, so kind of inverted. But the hyperpolarization is here. And I don't think there's anything we can do to stop it. I think the dominoes are falling and it's going to get worse. Take a look at the story from The Spectator. Burning Christianity from January 2nd, 2020. This is from over a year ago. They write, Samuel Gregg for The Spectator says, conspiracy theories aren't something to take seriously. But when flames engulfed Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on the evening of April 15th, 2019, my mind momentarily wandered down that path. After all, attempts to incinerate, vandalize, and rob Christian churches and shrines have become so commonplace in France over the past 3 years that one could be forgiven for concluding that something even more sinister was afoot. In 2017 alone, according to France's Interior Ministry, 878 acts of vandalism were committed against Christian places of worship, cemeteries, and shrines. That's an average of nearly 2.5 sites being targeted every day. Government officials play down the problem. As one French bishop told me, they believe that directing attention to church burnings and theft could encourage copycat behavior. That's actually true, though. You could encourage copycat behavior. But he added, they also fear publicity might fuel an existing concern among the population, that the state isn't fully in control of law and order. This perception is underscored by realities such as no-go areas for the police in some French cities and the ongoing Gilets jaunes protest. Most French newspapers have acquiesced in this silence. That's why you need to turn to organizations like the Vienna-based Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe to discover what's going on. Given the surge in jihadist terror throughout France from 2012 onward, it's tempting to blame Islamists for the onslaught of the attacks. There are clear examples when this is the case. When people shout Allahu Akbar, they mention, or was spray painted across the door of Notre Dame. Wow. In July 2018, the same words were discovered on the burnt walls of Saint Pierre du Martroi in Orleans after it was damaged by arsonists. Whether these and similar attacks were professionally planned or simply spontaneous, acts by French Muslims unhappy with their lot in life is unclear. But 21st century jihadists understand the psychological impact of assaults on national symbols. France's particular religious history means that any such campaign would inevitably involve its Christian patrimony. Fears that people have been going around burning churches. I don't know for sure. I'm not French. But of course, now you're seeing you're seeing fears over a threat of civil war, chaos, violence. Similar things are happening here. I think it's important to pay attention to what's happening in France. Now, it's not the same thing, but it's interesting that it's driven a nationalist sentiment. And from this, we see interesting conversations. Talking to Max and Stacey last night on the Tim Castaro podcast, Stacey mentioning that globalization is dying right now, that nationalism is on the rise. And it's true. And I don't think it's going to stop. People are starting to worry about this ridiculous system that was built. And maybe there's going to be this fourth turning, a period of great collapse, calamity, and tragedy, where people lose their lives and then ultimately results in a golden age. People wake up, that those that survived the crisis are stronger for it. And then hard times make strong men and strong men make good times. Perhaps there will be, after 10 or so years, an improvement. The reason I wanted to talk about this is I just think it's really serious when you hear the sentiment coming from these soldiers. But I do think there's almost some kind of reflection Look at what's going on in the U.S. Biden's first 100 days, rising gas prices, economic collapse, people unwilling to work, this exodus from the workplace, rising prices, this horrible jobs report, cyber attacks. We're being slammed across the board. Things are becoming unstable. And I think it's important to note that it can happen here. That crisis, civil war, insurrection, economic collapse, people think it can't affect them. That we're going to be fine. That it's going to be a party for the rest of our days. And that's just not true. France may just be, a faraway country to many people in America. Or it could be a sign of something that's going to come here to the United States. It's different. I get it. But I think something is happening. Europe and the U.S., the Western nations, they're being crushed under the weight of their inability to lead. Too many people remained ignorant and allowed morons to take control, extract value from our system, and then watch it burn. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.